Good morning. I'm Ronora Stryker. I'm one of the research actuaries on staff at the SOA. And for this session, session 2A, which is the call for papers on Living to 100, it's going to be a little bit different format than the other paper presentation sessions in that we don't have a formal discussant. I think you'll see by the topics here that we've grouped together that they're very topical, and I think we wanted to leave time for discussion at the end from you and a longer period for Q&A. So I know we have a lot of content here to get through, so we're just going to get started here with an introduction of our speakers. Our first speaker is Gordon Wu. Gordon Wu is the architect of the RMS Life Risk Longevity Risk Model, which was developed over a decade ago now, Gordon. He has a special interest in cognitive and psychological longevity factors and has developed a resilience index based on these. Dr. Wu is a Cambridge graduate. He completed his PhD at MIT and was a member of the Harvard Society of Fellows. He is a visiting professor at University College London and an adjunct professor at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. Our second presenter today is going to be Karl Polzer. Karl is an independent consultant and political economist specializing in long-term care, health care, and retirement financing policy with 30 years of policy and advocacy experience in Washington. After working for the federal government, a think tank, and a business association, in 2015 he founded the Center on Capital and Social Equity, whose goals are to better understand growing economic inequality and advocate for a more inclusive economy. He is a member of the National Academy of Social Insurance. Recent articles in national publications look at the impact of inequality in policy areas including long-term care financing reform, paid sick leave for low-wage workers, national retirement security strategy, and Social Security benefits and solvency. The SOA has published a couple of his analyses, including a paper exploring how changes in defined contribution withdrawal rules might reduce the risk of living to very old and needing long-term care. Another piece for the SOA was entitled How the American Retirement Savings System Magnifies Wealth Inequality. Polzer earned a master's degree in public administration in 1989 from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. Before that, he worked as a newspaper reporter and won several national awards for investigative journalism relating to environmental health and criminal justice. And then Sam Gutterman. Sam gets our award for probably the most presentations at Living to 100, and he definitely gets the award for the consecutive presentations. I think he has 3 in a row here. So you'll see Sam a lot today, and then I think tomorrow, right? Oh, and Wednesday. Okay. So there's another award for speaker on each day. Sam Gutterman is retired from PricewaterhouseCoopers, where he had been a member of the Actuarial and Insurance Management Solutions Group. During his time at PwC, he provided actuarial consulting services for insurance-related and government clients, in addition to firm-wide insurance and actuarial projects. At PwC, he would also assist in audits of insurance companies. Sam has served as a chairperson of several actuarial profession committees. He's been the past president of the SOA. He's currently a member of our Living to 100 planning committee. And he's also, in addition to that, very active in our new strategic research programs, the Aging and Retirement Strategic Research Program, as well as the Mortality and Longevity Strategic Research Program. So with that, I'm going to introduce Gordon, and I would ask that you save your questions until the very end after all 3 presentations. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Most of you would have arrived at this symposium by plane. aviation risk analysts consider all the ways that a plane can fall out of the sky. But there's another way of looking at aviation risk, which is to ask the question, what keeps a plane in the air? What keeps a plane in the air? Not what kind of things can bring a plane down, but what keeps the plane in the air? The answer to that question is the pilot. The pilot keeps the plane in the air. Regardless of what happens to a plane, what things, mishaps, whatever, it's the pilot who has the duty and responsibility to keep the plane flying. Now, the analog of the pilot for the human body is the brain. The brain. And that's what I'm going to be focusing on in my presentation today. How the brain can influence longevity. I'm so pleased that this morning, Steve, in his wonderful presentation, mentioned the fact that the cerebellum is the slowest declining organ that we have, the cerebellum. And that makes sense, and especially in the context of my presentation, because it's clear that the brain, which is declining the slowest, has the greatest opportunity of keeping us alive longer. Okay, I'll make a few comments about two key words here, frailty and resilience. Frailty is a state of having decreased reserve and resistance to stress. Resilience represents a state of adequate reserve and resistance to stresses. And I mentioned the fact that it's the pilot who keeps the plane in the air, and it's the brain that helps to keep people alive. Now, in respect of stress, what we have here is a simple chart just showing how, if you consider a minor illness, then as far as the frail elderly are concerned, those who are independent have a much greater chance of getting over this illness than those who are dependent. The stress is much greater if you are dependent. A few years ago, I wrote an article on resilience for the old, and it made the front cover of the UK Actuary magazine. And this cartoon on the left was produced by a graphic artist for the front cover. And just from looking at it, you can see that the message there is that all kinds of things go on in the brain which are very helpful for improving resilience. The three milestones on the right, 65, 75, 85, demarcate the young old from the old old. And we have the three survival enhancement factors there, which are labeled cognitive functioning, psychological well-being, and social functioning. So these are three factors which are not related to physical attributes, but relate to the brain or the mind. If we talk about successful aging, then we have to refer to the literature in gerontology. And there, the criteria for successful aging include maintenance of high cognitive and physical function, sustained engagement in social and productive activities, having close personal relationships with family and friends. Out of these three factors, cognitive function, psychological outlook, and social reserve, I generated a composite resilience index, which is a way of quantifying the benefit of having these three factors scoring highly for any particular individual. And an archetypal figure for a resilient individual is this person here, Florence Wesley, who featured in an interesting small book called Positively 90, which was published a few years ago, which was a book of interviews with nonagenarians. And in particular, this book sought to identify aspects of the lives of these nonagenarians which contributed to their long lives. And so in particular for Florence Wesley, who was 90 at the time of being interviewed, she was amazing in that she was a competitive Scrabble player. For those of you who have ever played Scrabble, just the idea of being a competitive Scrabble player would sort of fill you with awe. That sort of, keep thinking about it. Also, she had a very positive outlook. And in terms of social functioning, she had a large extended family and many friends. Regrettably, she didn't quite make it to 100. She died at the age of 97, but that's still pretty good going for anyone. Another aspect of psychology, which is very relevant to longevity, is the whole concept of positive psychology. My wife happens to be a psychologist, so I learned about positive psychology from her, but it's unfortunate that most people, either in their education or in their normal lives, do not hear about positive psychology. Psychology connotes something rather mysterious and something which is negative, like dealing with Freudian issues and so on. But in fact, positive psychology is all about all the good things which make up human flourishing. And the inventor of this whole subject is Martin Seligman here. And well-being is such an important part of keeping alive longer. So these are other aspects of functioning which helps to improve longevity. That engaging in regular social activities maintains better brain health. Social support, all regulatory systems are affected by social relationships, so they're important for well-being. And in terms of cognitive functioning, there's a saying that there's no health without mental health. Preservation of good cognitive functioning is critical to successful aging. There are many activities that influence longevity are very cognitively demanding. So these factors tend not to be considered that thoroughly when talking about the longevity of individuals. Now, in terms of cognitive activity and aging, now these are various points which one needs to make. That active stimulation is important for maintaining cognitive function. People who exercise their brains consistently throughout their lives live healthier and cognitively smarter lives as they age. There was a study done in Sweden which showed that additional years of education also reduces mortality. Now, in respect of cognitive age reduction, a key figure in this whole discussion is Mike Merzenich. He's the scientist who pioneered the whole concept of brain plasticity, namely that whatever age you are, it's never too late to add links to your neurons, that it's possible for your brain to adapt and help the brain deal more effectively with situations that you may find yourself in. So, in particular, for older people with mild cognitive impairment, a cognitive age reduction is achievable for some mental tests. And so I do recommend this book, Soft Wired, by Michael Merzenich. Now, Michael Merzenich is the founder of a company called Posit Science, which produces software called Brain HQ, where people can actually train using this software to perform mental functions more effectively than they otherwise would. So, to give one example, this software can be used by seniors who want to maintain their driving skills without having the required quickness of reaction. Then driving could be potentially hazardous. Now, one concept in terms of biological age which is something which is very relevant to this whole discussion, is that of a cognitive biological age, that individuals can be years younger than their actual physical age. And brain training studies show that it is possible for the cognitive biological age of an individual to be lowered compared with their chronological age. Again, through training of the brain, people can have a cognitive biological age which is younger than their biological age. And there's no more accessible way of getting this point across than to refer to the greatest quarterback of all time, Tom Brady. Tom Brady, who's won 6 Super Bowl rings, which almost certainly will never be surpassed, has this saying, think slow, play slow. Unfortunately, he's not in the Super Bowl this year, but that's his mantra, think slow, play slow. And in fact, not only is he someone who espouses Brain HQ, he has his own website, TB12, which actually espouses this whole kind of training regime. Okay, so in other words, by training the brain, the performance of it can be increased regardless of your age. So here's a case where this veteran quarterback has managed to maintain not only his physical fitness, but also his brain fitness through the special brain training. Now, coming back to more general implications of all this, chronic illnesses require self-regulation to limit damage, better knowledge and reasoning help manage disease. Errors in dosage can have life-threatening consequences. So you need your brain to be able to remember exactly what drugs you need to take if you have various health deficits. Now I'm going to move on to, in fact, the main message of my talk, which relates to Alzheimer's, which is this, that if you consider what the future horizon looks like for mortality improvement, one of the key questions is what would happen if there were to be an effective and affordable treatment for Alzheimer's? As Ronora said, as we at RMS Life Risks have had a model for longevity risk for a decade, and it has been a great disappointment that in the past decade there has not been a good treatment for Alzheimer's, which has yet emerged. There have been, unfortunately, a number of sad failures of potential treatments. Just in the last few months, Biogen have announced that they are submitting to the FDA their drug aducanumab, which was pulled last spring, but they brought it back because what they found is that if the amount of dosage is increased to a certain level, then it does seem as though a certain percentage of recipients do get a level of relief from Alzheimer's, which is worth having. And we won't know for a while whether this will actually make it to the market or not, but one of these days there has to be an effective treatment for Alzheimer's. So we can ask the question, if there were to be an effective treatment for Alzheimer's, what would the impact on mortality be? And the reason why this is an interesting question is that if you take people who have Alzheimer's, only a proportion of those actually have Alzheimer's on their death certificate. You can have, say, pneumonia on a death certificate, or in cases where people can't swallow anymore, then people can just die of malnutrition or lack of food intake or whatever. But Alzheimer's doesn't appear that often on people's death certificate. Now, one piece of evidence which has been really quite startling, which is not necessarily that well appreciated, is that there have been these longitudinal studies conducted in the USA amongst those in the Catholic Church and those in senior housing in Illinois. And these longitudinal studies have involved the collection of important data relating to their health condition over a whole period of time. In fact, here from the time they were recruited in the 1990s for over a decade afterwards. And the findings were actually quite astonishing, that in the kind of follow-up, 72% of those who developed Alzheimer's died, compared with 34.5% who did not develop Alzheimer's. We had analysis of the so-called population attributable risk, which is the proportion of deaths that occurred after developing Alzheimer's in excess of the deaths amongst people without Alzheimer's. And this proportion, which is adjusted for prevalence, is of the order of about 35-37%, so it's really quite significant. But to summarize it, this is just a plot just showing the survival curves for those with and without Alzheimer's. So the outcome can be summarized as follows, which is that according to the authors of this study, the actual number of excess deaths is about a factor of 6 times the number of deaths reported by the CDC. So it is really an extremely striking result. And, of course, we know that part of the reason for this is we have swallowing disorders, malnutrition, and pneumonia, which can mask the impact of Alzheimer's. But just to follow up on how I started my presentation, what these people are dying of mostly is a loss of resilience. On their death certificate, rather than Alzheimer's, they should have resilience failure. Because if you just take the various factors that I talked about, cognitive functioning, psychological well-being, and social reserve, these are all severely eroded by Alzheimer's. If anyone has any experience of looking after an elderly Alzheimer's relative, it's extremely emotionally exhausting, as well as financially demanding. All kinds of issues there, especially for middle-class families. And looking forward to the next decade, Social Security benefits may be cut as well before 2034. And this is my last point here, which is that effective, affordable treatment for Alzheimer's is needed if living to 100 is to be a realistic aspiration for many seniors. And this is a photograph of my late father-in-law, Don Thomas, who died 2 years ago, aged 92. He had Alzheimer's as well as a number of other health conditions. And I'm speaking from my own experience, that he was an absolutely lovely person. That was before he had Alzheimer's. But once he had Alzheimer's, he became extremely difficult to look after. And so when it comes to saying, what did he die of? Alzheimer's does not appear in his death certificate, okay, but it contributed to his early death. So again, this whole part that talks about answering this question: if there were an effective, affordable treatment for Alzheimer's, how much longer would people be living? And the answer to that is a lot. Okay, so we can all look forward to the day when there is finally a really effective treatment, and people should not be surprised if mortality rates start rising once that happens. So I'll stop there, Ronora. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me just... How do you... Does anybody know how to switch? So... It's always helpful when you use your own slides. That's it. Except, is it up there? Okay. So I got advance the slide this way? No, I got it.
Yeah, with the arrows.
Okay. So my topic's about... Oh. I haven't given a talk for a while, so I'm hesitant to touch the thing.
Yeah, well, this gets it
All right.
a little bit
Got
longer,
it.
but we got it.
So, will growing inequality make Social Security and long-term care finances harder? So, the theme here is, social insurance. So the model is communitarian. That's what Social Security is. Everybody pitches in, everybody gets out, and there's some kind of risk reduction for everybody. Long-term care, it wants to be, some of the people on the left, a social insurance program, but it's a wannabe. It's to the degree that it's financed by government money, it's a welfare system. People at the top pay in, people at the bottom get out. Just remember that. So what I'm going to talk about today, and I never met a slide I didn't like, so I've got way too much stuff. I'm going to fly through some of it, and it's on the slides are on my website. They'll be on this forum's website, www.inequalityinc.org, if you want to get the slides. So I'm going to talk generally about rising inequality in the United States. I'm going to fly through that. Challenges for long-term care, and that's what the essay is about. John Cutler is my co-author back there. Wanted to make sure to mention that. Challenges for funding Social Security, and then just a philosophical ending, if I have time for it, about as our populations become more stratified and more unequal, is that going to be create a lot of political problems, for coming to some kind of improvement here? So generally, this is just to show you the trajectory of the United States versus Europe. You see, this top is, these graphs show the share of national income. Top 1% is the red, bottom 50% in the U.S. You see them crisscrossing over a period of several years. And in Western Europe, they've stayed fairly constant. So that shows you what the story there is yes, inequality has been rising in the United States, and policy makes a difference. You hear this in the debates, among the Democrats about, Scandinavia having a more equal society. This is a measure of income inequality, the Gini coefficient. The United States, among all these countries compared, has the highest income inequality. And then we heard about Denmark and their problem. They have inequality problems in their pension system, but they're among the Western countries that are the lowest. So the problems I'm going to describe are much worse here. Okay? Okay, there's a battle royale going on among policy analysts and politicians that associate with different think tanks in Washington. There's inequality, and it's growing, but how important is it and how much? So the crux is that in market inequality, we see that the previous graph showed you a great shift. But when you add in tax effects and the effects of programs, Social Security, Medicaid, et cetera, it gets mitigated. So you have Piketty, Saez, and Zuckman. The left graph shows you before you adjust for government programs. You see a real steep. These are the guys advising Elizabeth Warren. I call them the French connection. They're the ones that are driving the debate. The Capital in the 21st Century, the great book that came out in 2014, Piketty's book. It brought a lot of attention to this issue. The yellow line at the bottom is very conservative. You'll go to AEI, American Enterprise Institute. You'll hear about that. Conservative, they put their thumbs on different variables in the equation, and you get a much more conservative estimate of the rise in inequality. And then when you look at post-tax and transfers, Otten and Splinter come out there's hardly any inequality. So when you read a news article, look at what they're referencing, okay? I'm sorry, I'm going too fast. The yellow is the conservative guys. The blue is the sort of socialist guys, and the red in the middle, which I'm going to now talk about more, is CBO, which is in the middle. CBO is the Congressional Budget Office. They've got to work between the Democrats and the Republicans, and they have a much more moderate, than the socialist type analysis. Why don't we go on? Because I can't go into this too much. I just want to show you the background. So CBO, I'm going to skip that. So CBO, this is a CBO paper that just came out, and what they're showing is that as this line goes up, there's a smaller reduction in inequality. So they're trying to see how government programs affect inequality. So you see here, in the Obama era, there was a larger reduction in inequality in the measure on the Gini coefficient. because you're introducing a lot of health insurance. The people, and now you're saying they're anticipating, with the Trump tax cuts, inequality getting higher. And the important thing here is that our official forecasters for our laws, what Congress does, they're forecasting a continued rise in inequality, income growth skewed towards the top, and less government support. So that's the bottom line here. So official guys, it's not going to stop. This is just a quick snapshot of wealth inequality is always higher than income inequality by definition. And the only story here is the little sliver at the bottom is what the bottom half own. You can't even hardly see it, and it's getting smaller. And you'll see that now we're getting into things that may impact markets that you're working on. More families than ever have zero or negative non-home wealth, up to about a third of the country. Okay? And this is interesting. Younger generations have smaller and smaller net worth, except for the very old. Between 2001 and 2016, every bar goes down except for the green bar, which is the very old. So we're seeing a systemic erosion. Okay? So what's driving U.S. inequality? And the best description I can find is Branko Milanovic was the chief economist for the World Bank, and he's now published a couple of spectacular books. Global Inequality, New Age for the Global Age of Globalization. Basically, it describes how inequality's lifted people out of how globalization's lifted people out of poverty in much of the world. But for the West, it's created more inequality because a lot of the industrial jobs have been shipped out to other countries, and we also have other research. You see a much more our type of capitalism is much more focused on financing. There's a lot more money being generated by money and less by basic production. Okay, so that's an important factor that I'll come to later. So the drivers are, there's more because of the financialization, more of the national income is from capital. It's just we're peeling it off our 401ks while the people that don't have them, they don't get anything. They don't have any asset. The bottom half don't get anything. More inequality. People holding high-paying jobs now have high capital. And 200 years ago, 100 years, when Marx was around, the owners of capital didn't have labor income. They just had a factory that they made money off of. So now you're having two drivers in one individual. This is fascinating, the tendency of high individuals to marry one another. We're almost like breeding an upper class. And if you look at even back 30 years, it's in Milanovic's new book, Capitalism Alone. Men and women are marrying at the same income now, and back after World War II, men had an equal chance of marrying anybody, of any people regardless of income. And then as wealth concentrates, the wealthy have more political power to hire lobbyists and experts, et cetera. It's political economics. So what is the result? The macro result is a shrinking middle class. It's a smaller market, lower productivity. We also correspondingly have higher personal, corporate, and government debt, which could be a time bomb, for the security of the whole system. More stress at the bottom. U.S. life expectancy has stopped rising, driven by changes at the bottom of the income distribution, even fallen a bit. We have more disease and drug abuse in our society, and a lot more political conflict, and we can't make decisions in Congress. So that's the background. I tried to race through it, but I'm happy to talk about it more after. So here's the essay, How Growing Inequality in the U.S. Makes Long-Term Care Financing Reform a Lot Harder. So this is based on a health affairs blog piece I wrote a couple of years ago. So what I was saying is, John and I have been working in long-term care policy for many years. We still do a policy group every month and talk about this in the Beltway. We've seen a battle between the left and the right, really the progressives wanting more social insurance, like let's have a long-term care program that's attached somewhat to Social Security or Medicare, and have everybody pitch in and everybody get out. And the market guys are saying, wait a minute. Medicaid is like, we should cut back on Medicaid so people will buy long-term care insurance, and this is a market problem, right? Well, I think these two recent developments have just blown this whole foolish discussion out of the water. One is the collapse of the long-term care insurance market. So if you don't have anything to buy that's a viable product that, it's not going to increase in price, unilaterally. There's no market solution, and I know there's hybrid products, but there is no market solution now, okay? On the other hand, the hollowed out middle class, and the growing economic disparities that I spoke about, there's just less resources available, right? I mean, it's going to be harder to tax people and create a whole new social insurance model. So I think on that front, a study just came out from the National Investment Center for Seniors Housing and Care. These are the guys who finance long-term care, assisted living, and nursing homes. It shows you 54% of middle-income seniors now lack sufficient resources if you take into account all of their income and home equity. Only 19% have sufficient resources. So there's not enough money to buy long-term care in the market without government assistance. Problem. So the crux of it is, I've been a critic of. I'm for expanding government coverage of long-term care, but I think we have to keep a close eye on who pays for it. Because if it mimics Social Security and it's a flat tax, it's very regressive and very unfair to low-wage workers, okay? So like Washington State just passed a very stripped-down long-term care package, flat tax. So the guy working in the nursing home for minimum wage, how's he going to benefit? He's going to be paying more of his small income in taxes, and then when he gets old, right now he can get on Medicaid and he doesn't have to spend down because he doesn't have any assets, right? So now he's paid all this money in, and he's not going to get that much back for it. So it's really a middle-class benefit being paid for by everybody. So I think they should be progressively financed, these types of expansions, because the middle class and the wealthy are going to be living longer and using them more, okay? You'll see that in a slide in a minute. Also, long-term care is kind of a bottom-feeder issue in Washington compared to Social Security. It's a wannabe social insurance program. And we need now trillions to fix Social Security. It has a 20% hole in it. So Congress is not going to do anything to spend money that compromises options for Social Security. In the paper I did for this SOA, I'm going to skip the next two slides. These are so where I end up with long-term care fixes is very middle of the road, small fixes. These are just things I suggested 4 years ago. And one of them was to raise the age where you have to start taking money out of your 401k as a small fix in security. The Secure Act does that, so I'm hoping we had some influence on that. But that helps people in the middle and the top a little bit, so they won't outlive their money. Okay, now I really wanted to get into this a bit because this is what I'm working on now, financing Social Security. So, every year the actuaries at Social Security come out with a report, and the long-term solvency of the program, and they're saying now in about 14 or 15 years, if Congress does nothing, the trust fund runs out of money, and there'll be a 20% cut all across the board of benefits. That's not going to happen, but nobody's doing anything about it. And so, the major policy options that we've talked about are raising the payroll tax, raising taxes in some way. But each one of these tax increases, the three that I put out, affect different income groups differently. Raising the payroll tax would be regressive, as I said, because the lower income people, you're crowding out more necessities in their budget. Lifting the payroll cap, it's its contributions are now capped at about $130,000. If you lift it, that would just affect wealthier people. Or you could come up with new taxes, like taxes on capital, et cetera. Cutting benefits, raising the retirement age, and I'll go into more detail there on how that is really regressive as well. And that's come up at other meetings, so that's one reason I wanted to get to these slides. So, growing inequality creates new challenges for Social Security. I'm going to talk about two of them. One's on the financing side. Social Security's tax base is eroded because of growing income inequality. So, Social Security draws all of its revenues from labor. There's two kinds of income: labor income, your paychecks, and capital income, your revenue from investments, stocks, rents, all that kind of stuff. Social Security gets nothing from that. And in our more financialized economy, we have a lot more income coming from the investment side and less coming from labor. So that relatively has decreased Social Security's financing. So there's an argument. Put a tax on it. I got it. Put a tax on, more taxes on capital gains and those kinds of things. Another thing is because there's not been much wage growth at the bottom, but there's been a lot at the top. There's much more of national labor income is come above the cap. And I have estimates in there. So I wrote a piece last year or a couple of years ago about how to, just as kind of to set a left-wing boundary on the discussion. You could fix Social Security's finances with 2 tax increases and have no benefit cuts. One is to lift the cap on the contributions and put a 6-point-something or other % tax on investment income. And and I have actuarial estimates here if you want to click on there that have been done by the Office of the Actuary in response to congressional inquiries. So here's the last thing I want to talk about. There's growing inequality has created stress in society that's widened the mortality gap. This is very interesting. If you look at quintile 1, over a 30-year period, the lowest income people, they're not living any longer. So it's living to 100, but not so much for low earners. They're not living to 70 or 80 a lot. So it's a big split in the United States, a very unequal country. Okay, and meanwhile, the top has been living longer and longer and driving up the average cost in the middle. So the life expectancy gap, from this study by the National Academy of Science, has documented a 7-year expansion in the life expectancy gap between the top and the bottom by income. There's about 5 or 6 other studies. The gap depends on where you start and how you measure. It's also a bad time to be a white male in the United States, and so I'm considering like off-white or off-color, because a lot of the mortality reversal since 2000, U.S. whites are dying faster. U.S. Hispanics are dying about the same rate as Brits. They're living longer. So, I'm not answering that question on the surveys anymore. I want to live longer. So, this is fascinating. There's a linear relationship between income. This is by Chetty. He's done a lot of work, Raj Chetty, on inequality. At the bottom of 5% of income and the top 5%, you have a linear, the more you make, the longer you live. It's very linear. But there's a place factor. The poor people live longer in New York than in Detroit, but once you get to be middle class, it doesn't matter where you live. You're going to live longer the more you make. I mean, as a group, So, bottom line here, this is a big battle going on between different think tanks that I'm involved in. So you're going to see different estimates coming out. But in my estimation, raising the retirement age, this everybody agrees on, is a cut in lifetime benefits. A lot of stuff you're going to see in the papers about monthly checks, it wouldn't affect the monthly check. It's just that the lower income people are going to die. They're dying sooner, so they're going to collect a lot fewer checks. Lifetime income goes down. Social Security gets less progressive. And a lot more low income, as we spoke the fellow spoke at the previous meeting, a lot more low earners aren't going to collect a cent. Okay? So I just did a little exercise of low earner, high earner you can peruse. How, in relative terms, if you raise the retirement age, the lower income worker loses. Okay, and they asked for policy options at the last session. So basically, like Denmark and the U.S., they're considering raising the retirement age. So in some way, they're going to have to maybe consider compensating low-income folks. And one way would be to have a higher minimum benefit, or just have easier eligibility for them. Here's a screwball idea I came up with, but it's more for a Gedanken experiment just to show the problem. So right now, to annuitize the Social Security benefits, it's an average that they use of life expectancy, right? What if you split it up into 3 pools, like 20% by income? The poor people, the rich people, and the middle class and annuitized separately, you'd see a hell of a lot of money moving around, and it would show the problem. But of course, it would break up the solidarity of the program, but it would never happen. But I think somebody ought to do that study. Okay, so I'm at the end of my time, and I have one last slide. And I know I went too fast, but I'm here, and I'm happy to talk through any of this stuff. I think a more unequal America, in which it seems like it's going to be more unequal, may find it harder to achieve the political consensus to solve these problems. You're going to have, as we saw with long-term care, more low-income workers being unable to afford taxes and the contributions, and more high-income taxpayers less willing to pay, right? So there's a clash. But who knows? Maybe if things right now things are good generally. If they're bad, if we go into another depression, that's when Social Security was created. There may be enough awareness in the bottom part of the population politically and power to make improvements for themselves. So anyhow, the politics are unpredictable. I have no clue. And thanks for your attention and letting me share some of these ideas.
You can just, it's already open.
Oh,
At the bottom here. Right there.
thank you. And now for something completely different. I wrote this essay primarily because there has been a dearth of information in literature, and at least the actuarial literature, on drinking and mortality. So what will I cover today, or in this session? First, the size of the problem, its consequences, and in particular focus on the moderate drinking issue, and some conclusions. One reason why I wrote this essay also is because I've been writing about behavior, the effect of human behavior on mortality, and I've been addressing obesity and smoking, and as I was doing that, I realized I really had not addressed the question of the use of alcohol. But since I started writing this essay, I found out that there has been an increase in the literature in discussions by various health-oriented organizations like WHO and etc. about the effect of alcohol on mortality. So this is an increasing problem globally, and it's a significant issue with respect to health and mortality. First, size of the problem. Alcohol consumption, based on what my observations are globally, is either the second or third leading behavioral related cause of death. And there's been several estimates involved, and they are indeed estimates. I've seen estimates between 2.5 and 3.2 million deaths per year that are attributable to the use of alcohol. It is more of a male than a female issue in terms of mortality. 7.7% of male deaths and 2.6% of female deaths are alcohol attributable. This compares with about 7 million due to smoking or any smoking, and between 2.8 and 4 million due to being obese or overweight. These are, depending on the estimator, you have to always deal with the fact that these are ranges of estimates, because alcohol attributable death, you don't see deaths due to alcohol on your death certificate, or it's extremely rare. So therefore, they are based on estimates. But it also has an impact on disability. That is about a little more than 5% of disability-adjusted life years are due to alcohol, or at least attributed to alcohol. So it's not only a mortality but a morbidity issue as well. About 2.3 billion people are current drinkers. That's 43% of the population. So this is not an insignificant issue. And I have to say that I am a part of that 43%. But it splits. Thank you. That's okay. I admit full transparency, of course. But they're splitting. It's basically split between people who drink or imbibe in spirits and beer and wine. More drink spirits, whiskey et al. I'm trying to push up the 11.7% factor percentage, but I haven't been particularly successful in that endeavor. But clearly men drink more often. And when they drink more than females do. Bottom line, once you start drinking, that can become a serious addiction that is entering to the mental area, where once you start drinking in excess, it is really hard to stop. Per capita consumption, annual. Globally, this is 5.9 liters of pure alcohol. In 1990 has increased globally to an average of 6.5, and the WHO projects that to increase to 7.6 liters in another decade. This is significantly, as we'll find out, because of lower and emerging countries around the world. They are able to afford to drink more alcohol, and therefore they do so. Some selected countries, you'll find that in most countries, there has been an increase in aggregate average distribution of alcohol consumption. But the reported consumption tends to underestimate consumption. When a person is asked by surveys of how much do you drink, typically you'll get an underestimate. So therefore, even these official statistics may be underestimating the problem. In addition, typically they will gather data in terms of alcohol based on the amount sold, and there are in some countries or some regions in the world where there is not a purchase, there's a barter or self-creation of alcohol. In some countries or some states in the United States, it's maybe moonshine, but some variation of alcohol. But the significant issue associated with alcohol consumption is what's been referred to as binge drinking. In the decade between 2002 and 2013, the increase in U.S. adults for 12-month alcohol use has increased by 7% from 2/3 to 3/4. That's overall. High-risk drinking has increased from 9.7% to 12.6%. That's exceeding the daily guidelines for alcohol consumption. Alcohol use disorders have increased accordingly, are consistent with high-risk drinking, and I'll get into that in a moment. The largest increases during this decade occurred amongst females. Older adults, racial and ethnic minorities, and those with lower educational attainment and lower family income. That means those who have been drinking less are now drinking somewhat more relative to us white males. I shouldn't say us being, I won't categorize myself as being older or not, but that's the way it goes. Those have been reduced. In other words, the differentials. We are becoming more equal in alcohol consumption in the United States. So there's a hope left for the inequality discussions. Over age 65 has also increased to now being 10.6%, being actually heavier drinkers. But on the other hand, offsetting this is U.S. high school students who drank, or now I'll get in the next slide about the percentage of drinkers in the youth category, but for those who drank more were binge drinkers. And here is the definition, is having 5 or more alcoholic drinks in a row. Now, different write-ups will say five or more drinks immediately following each other, but typically you look at it in a row or in a short time period in the same day. That 57 or more than half of high school students who drink binge drink. 43% of binge drinkers consumed 8 or more drinks in a row. Now, I personally, in my fighting for more wine drinking, I typically take 1 or 2 drinks. But thinking about taking 8 drinks of wine or beer seems to be mind-boggling. But there is a high percentage of individuals who do so. And between 2006 and 2010, about 4,300 high schoolers die annually of alcohol-attributed causes. But this is some percentage of drinking prevalence. Again, this is in the United States. We do a really great job of gathering statistics. I'm not 100% sure they're accurate, but we have a lot of statistics and data. The current use, you look at by age groups, they're the individuals between 12 and 13 have luckily been decreasing. You'll notice at the bottom, ages 12 to 17, the interesting statistic is a decrease from 17.6% to 9.2%. That is a remarkable change. And it's not something that has been heavily publicized. At least I haven't heard that much. You hear a lot about smoking and obesity. You don't hear about the U.S. success at reducing alcohol consumption. But you also notice that the current use of between 12 and 17 of females is just as high as the drinking percentage and prevalence for males. Unfortunately, females are catching up to us, and this is the wrong place for them to catch up on. But you can also notice the binge drinkers. You see of those who are 18 to 34, about 37 or 38% of those are binge drinkers, of total adults have binge drinked in the last month. And heavy use, which is heavy use is drinking at least 5 times during the past month. Heavy drinking. So those percentages, 10% of those people are heavy drinkers. We have a lot of heavy drinkers. What are the consequences? Well, I won't go through those lists of disorders or causation, but I'll mention the liver cirrhosis, which is the thing that comes to mind in terms of a health condition. There has been a significant increase in age-adjusted mortality over the past decade, and therefore a significant area of concern. Cirrhosis doesn't usually hit at your younger ages, so it's an accumulative effect of those particularly who are addicted to alcohol use. But there are various injuries as well. One thing that usually is publicized in different interest groups is drunk driving. In 2017, there were about 11,000 deaths due to alcohol-impaired driving. But this is actually a good figure because that's a reduction of 63% over the previous 3 decades. So all the efforts and all the attentions and all the public policy and publicity on drinking while driving has actually done quite good. I mean, 11,000 is still really high, but it is proved to be a success. In addition, however, to mortality, it can be disabling. Alcohol abuse syndrome is associated with numerous psychiatric effects and impaired work and personal productivity, as well as interpersonal dysfunctions. So therefore, not only are you hurting yourself if you are a regular drinker, but you're affecting other people as well in your relationships with them. Globally, the consequences, this pie chart shows a percentage of deaths due, and the primary one is on a global basis are injuries, but they're followed up pretty closely with digestive, cardiovascular, infectious diseases, and in particular, an area that I know it was published in JAMA last couple of months is cancer, that an alcohol contributes to cancer of a wide variety of cancer deaths. Globally, 800,000 deaths were due to injuries, 370,000 due to road injuries, and in fact, it doesn't affect just that person who is drunk, but also pedestrians and people who are in the car while a person is drinking. But there's 150,000 due to self-harm or suicide, and 90,000 to interpersonal violence. In other words, when someone is drunk, they will be more likely to commit homicide. And 17% of all deaths due to injury has been attributed to alcohol. More than half of the total deaths are due to individuals age over 50. So it's not just a young person's disease. It affects a cumulative effect as older and I listed here a couple of those leading causes. But in comparing global reporting of alcohol-attributed deaths and U.S. reporting, you see a very low amount of cardiovascular and cancer deaths reported. It suggests to me that, in fact, we are underestimating the problem. I don't think that we are collecting proper reporting deaths due to alcohol, and therefore I think that at least in the United States, we have more of a drinking problem than we are admitting. But I'd like to pay attention to the moderate drinking issue. I remember when I went to study being a young actuary in their underwriting section, there was a J curve. That is, those who did not drink had a higher mortality than moderate drinkers. So therefore, this hits me as well as many or some people in the audience. Is there a problem compared to non-drinking? Well, many earlier studies indicated that a moderate amount were associated with a lower risk. That is, if you drank one drink an evening or a day, you had better mortality than those who did not drink. But several recent studies have challenged this hypothesis. And the reasons why they've been challenged is primarily twofold. One is a failure to disaggregate the current non-drinking group. That is, there is a reason for many people who don't drink. It's not just by belief. It's because they are almost forced to for other medical reasons. And also, I think it's also because of inaccurate reporting. But many studies have, as I've mentioned, found that heavy drinking and binge drinking have serious health effects. But the question is, what does moderate drinking favorable, or does it provide some benefit? And I think that there's one large study by Bell indicated that a moderate alcohol consumption is associated with a lower risk of several but not cardiovascular diseases. So when you dig down into the causes of death, you find some inconsistencies, and in fact, drinking anything creates an adverse health condition. Another study showed a positive and curvilinear association with alcohol consumption, and that at least in the United Kingdom, men who drank more than 112 grams weekly lost 1.6 years of life, and those who drank more than 196 grams lost 2.7 years. So it seems like there is a significant loss of life here, but I think this graphic tells me the story, although not totally. This is a study of 100,000 U.S. adults. Suggest on the left graph, you'll see that there is a lower mortality for those who are moderate drinkers. Cardiovascular risks, it's even more so. But if you look at cancer-related risks, there is a monotonic increase. That means every drink that you take increases your risk of incurring a cancer, death to the cancers. And so, therefore, you think that a little bit of drinking is okay, but there are some potential health consequences as well. Care is needed to conclude on this issue. If practical separate categorization of non-drinkers should occur, because otherwise you may very well be comparing against very dissimilar populations. But a study of cause of death may reveal different patterns. But it appears that in the total, moderate drinking can be of value, and therefore my one drink of wine isn't going to be causing me a significant problem, although cause of death may lead me to different conclusions. But policy prescriptions, last slide. There are several policy areas in society that can be taken to address the issues they've associated with drinking. Maximum permissible blood alcohol concentration while driving. The U.S. is more liberal than many other countries. It may be appropriate to even become more restrictive on that, even though we've been at least moderately successful to some extent. What other method is through sin taxes. We need more revenue, and therefore we can hit the people who are drinking, particularly binge drinking, through taxation or provide incentives through insurance pricing. We can restrict accessibility, particularly to the youth. In the United States, it's been successful, and hopefully that'll move through generations. But it's possible that governmental policy or licensing of one level of the product cycle involved might do some good as well. Different countries have taken different actions and restrictions and banning marketing and advertising, make it less, provide less of brand awareness, and therefore reduce drinking. But bottom line is disclosure and education of contents and dangers are very useful in terms particularly of the heavy drinking. But I think there's a question in my mind about why the U.S. has been so successful in terms of youth drinking, and maybe we could utilize some of that idea elsewhere in the population in different countries. One problem is it could be because of increased screen use. It's a little more difficult to drink while reading your screen, because otherwise it's more difficult to read at the small print that's on the telephone. That may be facetious, but it's something to think about in terms of alternative approaches to enjoyment of life. But despite some favorable recent global trends, and in terms of the youth in the United States, there's been no progress in reducing the total per capita alcohol consumption in the world as parts of the world become richer, and even in spite of the inequality discussions, I think that it's very clear that the overall global wealth has been increasing. I think that this is going to be even more of a problem globally than it has in the past. And it's the disease attributable to alcohol remains high, especially for males, and increasing in some countries and for some causes of death, as mentioned. Recognition and management of high alcohol, particularly in binges or a syndrome, remains, I think, essential to global health, and therefore should be thought of in terms of trends of this might be useful information going forward for all actuaries involved and concerned with either mortality or health of the population. And anyone who wants to get references to some of the items on the slides, I've given them on this presentation and included in the essay.
We do have some time for questions or comments. When you ask your question, please state your name and company affiliation, please.
Hi, Ronnie Klein from Build Here. No one will know what that stands for. So, Karl, just a quick question, and you did go quickly, so it was hard for me to pick it up. One of the things that people talk about in countries all over the world is to have need-based testing for Pillar 1 for Social Security, and you didn't mention that.
You mean for eligibility or level of benefit, or?
Needs-based, so that the very wealthy would still contribute, but wouldn't gain if they didn't meet met the needs.
We already have some of that because Social Security is taxed above a certain level, so it reduces There's
no need test. You can be a billionaire and still collect Social Security.
Okay. Well, if you look into there's just a huge battle about the philosophy of Social Security, and the National Academy on Social Insurance does a really good job in this, and I'm a member of it. And the purists, they see it as this machine that really Congress built to provide lasting fairness among everybody. And so the basic trade-off that they cite is an equity. That is, if you put money in, you should get something back based on your contribution. So there's an equity consideration for higher earners, and there's an insurance consideration for lower earners that they have to have enough to live on. And that's an internally.
Yeah, I'm just surprised that you mentioned it, because I will tell you that it's come up in the elections too. I mean, Bloomberg himself has said, I'm happy to contribute more and I don't need anything coming out. So billionaires do say you don't need it, but it just never gets through. So.
Well, yeah, but the upper middle class is certainly going to resist, and all the whole, they're not, but you're going to have to get the money, if you lift the cap, right? If you lift the cap on contributions above 130, that's going to hurt the upper middle class. They're going to fight it. So one of the solutions that I listed, I had no time to get into details. It creates a bubble above that where it would be gradually disappear. And Bernie has asked for an estimate of it, and it's just a political issue. And I don't know that 10 people will say, well, don't add our Social Security, but that's just talk. I mean, if you try to take away anybody's Social Security, they're going to say, I paid into it, I want to get something out of it. So, but it's a good point. It's part of the debate. Sorry, we can talk more about it.
Go ahead.
Hi, Vince Graneri, Predictive Resources. Sam, as Ronora talked about your extensive resume here with Living to 100, I saw you weren't doing anything on obesity this year, and I was very pleased, but now you're attacking another one of my vices. So, but with respect to that, these new studies that show moderate drinking to be hurtful in some way, did they break down things by age cohort? I've studied maybe a couple 100,000 lives for 15 years, but they were seniors, and I still saw that moderate drinking being a protective thing versus heavy drinking, which was not. But did these studies address that?
Many studies have. I think I mentioned that the majority of deaths have been alcohol attributable. They're like over age 50. So therefore, there's a lot of influence on mortality, but obviously, as a percentage of the total mortality rate, it's relatively small, but relatively small is too high in terms of behavioral study or behavioral effect. But I think that you're seeing increasing number of studies who are distinguishing between the no alcohol or those who don't drink. Is there a reason for not drinking? And I think that the more recent studies that have looked at more than just the aggregate category are revealing some really interesting relationships which we haven't seen in the past.
Thank you.
We're actually running out of time, so I'm sure the speakers will stay for a little bit.